Morena councillors and staff, welcome to this rather wet day. Can I just thank those councillors who have travelled some distance to be here. It's greatly appreciated. Lovely to see you, Councillor Eatey. And welcome Councillor White on Zoom. Just the opening statement as per usual, that just reminding all councillors that the open session of this meeting is being live streamed, recorded. Recording will be made available on our website following the meeting. Just a reminder that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. So moving to apologies, I have apologies from Chairman Leader and Councillor Winters. I'll move. Councillor Thurston second. All those in favour, aye. Against and carried. There's no public forum. There are no items to be included on the agenda that aren't already here. There's no change to the order of business. Are there any conflicts of interest for anybody? There are none. Public excluded, business to be transferred, there is none. Now, the IQ test for the day, councillors, comes around our minutes. We have both the minutes of the previous meeting, both in the open section and public excluded. But if there are no amendments to the public excluded minutes, then we can simply just move them together with the open minutes. How's that for an IQ test? Are there going to be any corrections to the minutes in the public excluded section? There won't be, so I will move both the open minutes of the 8th of August and those in the public excluded. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Campbell, thank you. All those in favour, aye. Against and carried. Steph and Co, welcome. Firstly, Steph, can I say excellent report. Really looking forward to your presentation on it. Gave us some really useful, I think, feedback. So thank you. So over to you, and if you would be good enough to introduce your team, and then we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Morena koutou, councillors. Through the chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to present a summary of the community engagement of the last 6 months. We have come here as a team because it has very much been a team effort. Across the Essential Freshwater Policy Program, there are approximately 70 staff working on different elements of this. So to my far left, I have Jess Shaler from our science team, Michelle Lee from our planning team, and Pete Hennessy from our communications team, who's standing in for Kate Barnes, who couldn't be with us today. And online we have Margaret Courtney from our Te Aomarangi team, who's been championing the Kaupapa Māori workstream. So we'll all be sharing a little bit today and all here to help answer your questions as best we can. If you'd like to see page 19 of your agenda, that's where our report starts. And today's recommendations are simply that the report is received, and note that an outline of coming engagement activities for the 2024 will be brought back to Council in December. No decisions are expected from Council today in regard to policy, but the feedback that we're sharing today and that we've received will form part of the planners process. What am I doing wrong, Jenny? There we go. So the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management 2020, or the NPSFM, has required that Council engages with tangata whenua and community to set long-term visions for freshwater and environmental outcomes. This paper summarises the community engagement that took place between April and September this year on draft policy options for region-wide changes and at a freshwater management unit scale. Feedback was received from probably more than 390 contributing individuals or organisations. This closed less than a month ago, and staff are analysing the feedback that's been received. Jenny. This process has been highly compressed compared to earlier engagement that some of you might recall from our Plan Change 12 process for freshwater. Of the hundreds of people that we have spoken to, I've yet to meet someone who disagrees with caring for fresh water. However, how we care for fresh water, the rules that we make, who pays, who manages this process, is not such an easy question to answer. If you could please click through. Thank you. This again is the timeline that the freshwater policy team have been sharing with you around where we're at. That yellow section has been focusing on that intensive community engagement. If you could skip 2 for me, please, Jenny. Thank you. In this 5-month campaign, we aim to provide opportunities for community to connect with staff in ways that worked for them. Public events were held in working hours, after working hours, weekdays, weekends, and spread out to recognise that we had busy periods in our different industries, like our kiwi fruit sector, our dairying sector, and we're located across all 12 of our onshore freshwater management units. I'd like to acknowledge we didn't hold a specific event on Mōtiti Island, but we have worked with the Mōtiti Island community. In addition to these events, staff have also connected with interest in sector groups. So the ones that are displayed up there, the 35 events, were the ones that were advertised to the public. You'll note right down the bottom, there was also one held at the Rangataiki Tavern, which was an additional initiative of one of our land management officers to connect with some of our more remote residents. While we did work with these industry and sector groups, working with them alone would not have met the requirements of the National Policy Statement. Hence, we needed to make publicly accessible opportunities available in person. As well as those, we held 5 online webinars. These were also available to be viewed afterwards, and they were, at the time of writing the report, they had been reviewed 240 times, which is a little bit frightening if you start in one of those videos. We also received feedback online, by email, and through hard copy booklets.
Steph, what's the significance of the colours and the dots?
So
Some are yellow.
The yellow shows a more greater intensity of events. So you'll see there's a few in Whakatane Township itself. We had 3 in Kawerau, Rotorua. Those were all held in urban areas in Rotorua. So it's just more frequent events. Tauranga catchment, for example, we held 2 in Katikati. So while it might appear there were less in Tauranga, they were just spread across that freshwater management unit. With our participation, attendees were invited to register when they arrived at events. We didn't request age, ethnicity or gender information, but we did invite them to express what their interest was in freshwater. And that's the graph that you'll see on the right there, that range of interests. A summary of the demographics who did provide those details through their online feedback or in their workbooks is available on attachment 3, page 32. However, the numbers are quite small, and we don't believe those are statistically significant, but they do show some general trends. In terms of the other for that category, that includes people who didn't indicate any particular interest, and where multiple interests were registered, we took our best guess at what was the primary interest of those people. And we recognised that a few people, but not many, came to more than one event. While recognising the challenges of consultation fatigue, the demands of multiple pieces of legislation and change and the cost of living rises, we had some really positive feedback on the process. I heard really high praise for the Freshwater Management Unit story booklets from iwi authorities who are working across multiple jurisdictions. Some of the staff highlights for me personally was holding an event in Katikati, having the fire alarm go off and the community being so passionate that they continued the consultation while the fire department cleared the building and allowed us to re-enter. We also had a landowner who's been doing a whole lot of restoration work on their property with one of our land management officers in the Waitahanui, who found a dead fish and brought it into us at Otamarako Marae to identify, because he knew he had something great, he just wasn't quite sure what it was. And I think our science team did their best at a post-mortem on the giant kōkapu. So while we would have always loved to have seen more feedback, the feedback that we've had has been quality. It has been considered and it has been in depth, and we expect to receive more feedback through future processes. I'd now like to invite Pete Hennessy to talk about the highlights of the communications campaign, and then we'll move on to the findings themselves in terms of the feedback.
Thank you, Steph. As councillors will be aware, we've had a significant communications program to support the work of Steph and the wider team running since earlier this year. There's a full list of mediums and channels that we've used on page 21 of the paper, but I just thought I'd take an opportunity to take you through some of the examples. give you an understanding of some of the metrics associated with this, because they're not insignificant. So we have sort of thrown everything at it. So if you look at the slide, there's some examples of the digital work that we've done in digital ads, which appear on phones and so on, which are deliberately placed. They've been seen 6.2 million times, and that's been fundamental to driving about 17,000 people visiting our website and 403,000 people watching videos. So quite significant in terms of scale and reach. We've also used a range of paid social media, and that is the likes of Facebook and Instagram, and that media suggests we've reached about 292,000 people. Thank you. As well as all the slick online stuff, old school still works as well, because as Steph said, we're very cognizant of the different communities and different tools and the way they digest communications. So we did do a direct mail fire to 17,200 people. And we also ran 90 print ads across the publications in the Bay of Plenty. So right from the likes of the Whakatane Beacon through to the Waihi Leader down into Rotorua. So we did sort of do a bit of a full court press in terms of local media, because we do know, despite social media coming to the fore, some of these traditional media communications are still read widely in local communities. We've also obviously utilised bus backs as well, and they have gone around Tauranga, Mount Puna, Kerikeri, Whakatane and Rotorua. So just wanted to give councillors a sense of the scale and the mix of channels that we've used. We've been very deliberate in trying to use every channel available to be incredibly customised and to be responsive. So I trust that just provides an overview of the work that we've done to support the work that Steph's done, but also raise awareness about this important mahi. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Marg to share on the key highlights in the Tangata Whenua consultation.
Kia ora koutou, ko Margaret Courtney ahau. Firstly, I just want
Margaret.
Yeah.
Margaret, sorry, Councillor Scott just has a question, sorry.
Fine.
Oh, sorry about that, Margaret. Yeah, I
That's
just
okay.
wanted to ask about some of those questions. So the population of the Bay of Plenty is around about 350,000, and we've delivered to over 1 million homes. Did we sort of deliver outside of the Bay, or was that because it's several publications to the same place? That's what that's about. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I think some of the metrics definitely. I mean, they're consolidated, but I think in terms of the reference to the direct mail, that's been rural households and very targeted. So yeah, I take your point, councillor.
Overall, the 17,000, if someone's watched a video once, they've only watched it twice, so probably 17,000 is probably 17,000 individuals.
So in terms of the 17,200, that was for the flyer, which went to folk. And then in terms of...
403,000 people watched the whole video.
Yeah, the videos had 403,000 views.
So a couple of people must have watched them twice, but in general...
Through the chair, some of the video setups were a video that you couldn't skip when watching television on demand. So yeah, some people may have seen it more than once.
It's Margaret.
Kia ora. Apologies for not being there in person. But our Māori engagement strategy is based on Te Hohona, which was developed in 2020-2021. So that provides some flexibility in our approach to engaging with tangata whenua. And as per the report, we've had a number of individual engagements with iwi and hapu directly, as well as our hui arohe that was held in May. We've also reported back at various co-governance forums and committee meetings as well. Komiti Māori obviously highlighted some of our projects. People were invited to share their project journey. We also attended MFE Te Mana o Te Wai conference, and that's where all the funded projects came together to showcase their projects as well. And so it was a good opportunity to make connections with various people there. One of the projects is the Te Aroha Freshwater Working Group, who have developed the Te Mana o Te Wai statements, which is a requirement of the Three Waters legislation. So it's connecting with those groups just to see how we might see what synergies we might have with them. In terms of some of the feedback, obviously tangata whenua want to be involved right from inception, across the whole planning, planning and activities, right through to decision making and implementation. They're very focused on monitoring their waterways and restoration projects, looking at not just the site or the stream, but the whole catchment and how different varying parts affect their waterways and the environment. Again, capacity and capability of tangata whenua is vital, and is an ongoing issue, mainly due to resourcing and finding that support and having a sustainable framework to build their capability and capacity beyond sort of funding. So looking at, various, opportunities or frameworks where they can continue that work. They're also mindful of different strategies to mitigate adverse effects and looking at natural sort of methods to do so. Mahi na kai is an important value to them, and it's also a compulsory value, and the importance of how that is articulated in a planning context is sort of can be challenging, and so that work continues. Some of the concerns that tangata whenua have is obviously the water take situation and having access to water. The allocation methodology, with the increase in housing developments across the region, they're also concerned about municipal supply and that demand. And they're also concerned about Mātauranga Māori sharing of that, how it's going to be received and stored and taken care of. And there was also a concern, obviously they're concerned about the environment and the degradation of the waterways and its surrounds, and how that restoration is going to be, how that's going to be improved and maintained, and whether there should be some sort of user pays type system, I guess, to combat that. Yeah. Thank you.
So just if we pause for breath there, and Councillor White, you have a question?
Yes, kia ora, Courtney. Thank you for that. And thanks, team, for an excellent report. Apologies, I'm not there. I had a wall of water, decided to come home, turn around and come home. Look, in terms of the MFE conference that you attended on Te Mana o Te Wai, Courtney, were there any learnings? There were a whole lot of examples obviously put on the table from different quarters around iwi engagement in some of the ways and means, the effective means that have been that people have undertaken. One of the reference points for me is that when I facilitated the Hui no Te Rua on the FDS, not the FDS, on this particular issue, Ngāti Rangi Wewehi had a half an hour where they talked about the practical application of their work in this freshwater management space. And it really intrigued everybody. It opened up a number of doors of understanding of how their involvement in Partnership with Lakes Council really worked. And it worked to the extent that that partnership has been is a very warm relationship, and the sharing of resources is happening effectively. So, just getting back to my question, what are the learnings that you took from situations like that, and also from the MFE conference?
Yeah, there was a variety of projects that were highlighted at the MFE. A lot of them were the work of tangata whenua on the ground, the kaitiaki, monitoring their waterways, and the conference really was a good opportunity for those kaitiaki to understand the different, and ourselves, the different issues that they were facing. But a lot of it was collaboration between themselves and kōrero amongst themselves, to learn off one another and look at best practices, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's that learning off each other and the ability to articulate things that are working on the ground that
That's
mobilise iwi, more so than a presentation on what this all means. For them on the ground, making a difference, what it means to them, and having those exemplars, I think, is important.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, and I think one of the probably the success factors of the hui aroha that we did have was the iwi presentations, so that our audience could actually hear what other iwi were doing on the ground, and so that there can be that connection between, our policy statement and how it can be sort of manifested on the ground and working with the environment.
Yeah, because
So
if I can just say one more, Madam Chair, the issue around Mātauranga Māori came through very strongly at the hui that I was at, and their ability to cater, to look at it from a well-being perspective and create that connection with the participants in the audience, I think really, really went a long way to creating understanding and participation.
Thank you. I've got Councillor McMillan, Shirley and Nees.
Oh, kia ora, Margaret, thank you. I just noticed, I think it's page 29 there, the comment around lack of trust that there is any compliance monitoring of permitted activities. Just wondering, was that just one person's comment, or was that a theme coming through? And therefore, what do we do with that once we are aware that there is that lack of trust?
Well, I think with anything, it's that relationship building and how we work with tangata whenua on the ground and continue that relationship to build that trust. Obviously, the kaitiaki monitoring is something that is happening and that iwi want to do, and there needs to be some sort of connection with our compliance monitoring as well, so that there's that, so that our kaitiaki are confident enough to engage with our compliance teams, perhaps, so that there's that connection there.
Joined up.
Pardon?
Yeah, like that joined up partnership.
Like a approach, and that does take time to build that. Again, building on good relationships, and that's what we need, and that's what we've been trying to do. Engage with the iwi hapu tangata whenua when they're ready to do so. But again, it's a work in progress, and we continue to do that.
Kia ora, thank you.
Councillor Shirley, then Councillor Nees.
Kia ora, Margaret. I noted there from the slides that Mātauranga data sovereignty was one of the concerns. I'm not quite sure I understand the concern. Perhaps you could help with an example or just explain it better for me. I'm just can't quite understand it.
Yeah, it's around to do with they're happy to share mātauranga on but not perhaps the specific sites. So, they'll have cultural practices around a specific site, perhaps, where they go to do various things. And so they can articulate what it means to them, but the site is perhaps what they don't want to share. But it was also concerns around how, if they did share this information, how as a council are we going to how is it going to be received? How is it going to be stored? And what are the protocols around that?
Thank you.
Does that help?
Thank you. Firstly, I just want to say I really appreciate the quality and the amount of work that you've put in to get us this information. It's just been such a huge effort. So I've got a couple of questions. One is around the Matauranga Maori. Under the legislation, it's an essential component for consideration for resource consents. Do you think that Matauranga Maori sovereignty issue is going to be a barrier for us in making decisions on consents, or to applicants who need to be reflecting that?
Well, I don't think it will be a barrier, but we've just got to think about the ways and means of how how it's going to be shared, I suppose. It's still a work in progress, I must say, as well, because that's sort of one of the new exciting parts of the NPSFM, is bringing
Excuse me, Marg.
that knowledge.
So we've got a guest speaker. Ruben Fraser might like to add some to that question.
Thanks, Ruben.
Morning, councillors. That's a really good question, Councillor Nees. I think the answer is sometimes it's a barrier. We have a range of approaches that we can take. In an example that Margaret's spoken about, where there might be a significant cultural site, where there's a cultural practice that, let's say, it requires a certain flow or a level in a river to carry on. And like Margaret says, I think the focus for us is on that relationship, so that enough information can be shared to make an informed decision on a consent application, without trampling on that mātauranga, for a better expression. And I think we remain committed to working through that at an individual basis.
Thank you. So my other question, and I felt that a lot of the feedback was almost identical to what we received for Plan Change 9. Very many of those themes were coming through again. So I guess my question is, do you think the feedback from Tangata Whenua could be taken as representative for the whole of the Rohe? And I ask that because what we heard in Plan Change 9 was you weren't talking to the right person because you weren't talking to me. And I acknowledge the huge amount of effort that you've put in to try and get out there, but the legislation says, to the extent that Tangata Whenua want to be or can be involved, that may change. So I guess my issue is around, are we still going to be in the situation once we've got the plan change, as we were with Plan Change 9, where we had a lot of submissions from Tangata Whenua because they weren't spoken to at the time when we were going out and trying to get feedback?
Thank you, Councillor Lees. I'll have a go at this one if you like, Marg, and you can nod enthusiastically or shake your head. The engagement that's happened in this period is part of the process. The door remains open for iwi and hapu to provide feedback as we go through the planning development phase, and there will be an early release of the draft policy early in the first quarter next year, which Tangata Whenua will be at the top of that list in terms of receiving that document. So we will continue to engage with those who are interested and available, but we would love to share the kind of key highlights of what we have heard from those 390 contributors, if that's appropriate at this stage.
Councillor Scott, then Councillor Iti.
Yeah, kia ora, Margaret again. My question is around really how we talk about Tangata Whenua and the community as being totally separate, but of course in many communities it's there's big intersections or intersections to some extent. I'm really wondering, some of these issues, there might be someone who's a member of the local Tangata Whenua, but they're also a farmer who are not doing the right things or have applied for a consent or have a consent, which to what extent is that are those conflicts of interest important, and where do you see the regional council as a third party, as it were? Are we conciliators? Are we facilitators? Do we stay out of it? How do you see that dynamic working?
I guess, you go for it, Marg, if you'd like to.
No, you go.
We all wear many hats in the community, every single one of us sitting around this table. And while there's the responsibility for council to engage with tangata whenua in a formal capacity, absolutely we're hearing from Māori who are also farmers, who are growers, who are landowners. So we will do our best. I have a comment here from our guest speaker. Go for it, Rubes.
Thanks, Councillor Scott, and I think that's a really good question, and we come across this example a lot of times. Most commonly, in my experience, there's a distinction between representatives of an iwi or a hapu, and in your example, a farmer, and sometimes there's the farmer may also, of course, be a member of that iwi or hapu, and there's often a conflict there, and sometimes this plays out with commercial arms of settlement trusts, for example, who conflict with their kaitiaki representatives from the same hapu, for example. I think, in my mind, we approach that the same way that we would for any other applicant. And the cultural values, effects and mitigations in the consent process need to be identified by those mandated kaitiaki representatives. And while that does create tension sometimes, we need to rely on our processes to work through that, to try and understand those effects and whether anything needs to be done about them. So if I put that another way, if there's a Māori farmer who is a member of a hapu who applies for a consent to do some kind of activity, that person would need to go through the same processes as any other sort of farmer.
Yeah, so we're confident in our processes that we are not going to get caught up in something we'd rather not get caught up in.
That's a very different question. Yes, we're confident in our processes that they will identify the right effects that we are required to manage, and ways of managing those effects.
Ishi?
Yeah, I think my late Uncle Paki Nikura was a perfect example of a person who wore too many hats sometimes. And I had to remind him which hat are you wearing, Uncle? But kia ora, no, my question is, where we're talking about engagement here, so I don't want to venture into policy stuff, lest Ruben continues sitting on no chair at a microphone. It goes back to Councillor Nee's question with regards to Plan Change 9, and I just am wondering how, from the lessons we learned from Plan Change 9, and of course the Hononga came in 2021, how we have changed the engagement from when we went out to engage on Plan Change 9, and also from the analysis, what are the differences? The comment from Councillor Nees was that it sounds kind of very similar, but I guess in terms of the way that we went out to engage, was there any change in the way that we engaged? And is there any analysis around the way did we get more PSGEs to comment? Did we get more? So those are the differences that I'm interested in terms of the pre-Plan Change 9 to now.
Through the chair, I might ask Namuta if she's able to respond to that. I don't believe any of the staff directly here worked on the iwi engagement for Plan Change 9.
Tēnā koutou through the chair and councillors. So in terms of Plan Change 9, because it was a more targeted plan change, we've done more extensive engagement as part of this process. Our timeframes have been longer for this process, and we have Te Hononga, which we are now implementing, which provides for a range of different options and techniques to connect. As part of Plan Change 9, we did again reach out to all of the iwi and hapu, as well as hold Hui a iwi. As part of this change, we have again, reached out through our connections and contacts. We've done huiaui, we've got technical working groups. We've certainly progressed any avenue open to be able to connect. So we have been able to connect with a broader range of different iwi and hapu. And certainly we are seeing a lot of similarities in the feedback that we are receiving, which is useful for us because clearly the issues that were raised previously are still relevant today. So all of that information will contribute into the shaping and framing of our plans.
Councillor White, then Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, just in response to Councillor Scott's comments about the Māori farmer, the bulk of farms are held by land trusts and corporations under the Tū Te Whenua Māori Act. And I know from my involvement over the years that over the last decade or two, certainly the notion of well-being has come to the fore. So they're very, very conscious about the environmental impacts of what they do. For example, Ngāti Whakaue closed down one of the dairy farms because they were pretty close to the lake. They didn't want to contribute. That was their story. They didn't want to contribute to the further pollution, and ended up doing a range of things, including investigating dairy sheep right now. They went into truffles and everything else. So, and that practice and the conversations, and the practice and conversations are happening as we speak very intently, because the expectations of their many thousands of beneficiaries is that the taiao, the well-being of our land and our water, is extremely important. So I just wanted to put that on the table to let you know that the individual Māori farmers who are out there, and I don't know too many of them, but like everybody else, they'll comply, and I wouldn't expect this to be a conflicting situation. But in terms of the land trust and entities, they are endeavouring to comply and moving that way because they know their future exists around compliance in that way. And also culturally, it's appropriate. Having been involved in some of the trade issues and discussions as well, that expectation that Māori maintain a well-being approach to their farming and their product opens the doors to opportunities internationally. That is the story that has come from some of the exposures I've had around the tables of those land trusts and corporations. So just to sort of give you a sense of Māori land ownership from a farming perspective and where that journey is happening or where that journey is at the moment.
Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, Margaret. Margaret, my question is around your having undertaken iwi engagement across the whole of the Toi Moana Rohe. And my question is around, having had the ability to do that, does that now give us a more comprehensive view of the stance tangata whenua are taking across the region? Your ability to identify the commonalities of the challenges, the opportunities, are there commonalities, and how do you think then that provides us a better mechanism to have a bigger picture of what we can be looking at from a regional perspective, given that we also have to be taking into consideration the views of mana whenua?
Blimey, Margaret, you've got all the hard ones today, haven't you? You happy to have a crack at that?
We are trying our best to get across the little head. I can hear myself. That's why. Yeah. So we are trying to get across the little here, and with various groups from post-settlement groups to iwi authorities to mana whenua as well on the ground. There's been several projects that have included whānau hapu, doing projects on the ground with particularly in the Mātātua area. We are trying to get around to everybody so that we can have those discussions and to get a consensus around what the problems are. There will be situations where there's going to be specific issues or challenges at place, so in a particular locality, which might be, different from the region-wide sort of themes that are coming through. But again, it's us working with them, building that relationship, drawing out those issues and the opportunities that might come from those, those issues that we want to help resolve with them. So we're continuing to work with tangata whenua at all levels, and trying to relay that back to our processes internally and through to our planning, through to our planners.
Well done, Margaret. Okay, Steph, back to you. And
hello. So this is a quick summary of the feedback from the general community events, and there were tangata whenua present at some of them, but anyone was welcome. And overall, people agreed with the visions and values we'd identified, which were very strongly environmental and recreational. And some people did comment that we've focused on the problems we need to fix, but we also need to realise we have some pretty good water in our region, and we want to celebrate that and protect our good places and keep them like that. Human and animal well-being was a really big priority. They're like, yes, we want to look after the river, but we also need to look after our people. Sorry, is that not loud enough? So if it was a drought, we want to be able to have stock water available, so we're not seeing animals dying. People want clean water to drink. That was something that people thought might need more recognition. Food production and security, also important. Everyone wants to feed their families, everyone wants clean rivers, but how do we balance that need? Agriculture, horticulture, industry, there's a lot of mixed feedback. People are like, we don't want those discharges, but we do want our jobs. It's all about where to balance those things again, and recognising that there will be trade-offs. Industries, again, want certainty to operate. So there were lots of comments saying, we've got this consent, can we keep this consent? What's going to happen? So yeah, people want certainty to know this. We are in a process. We were presenting a very early draft, and people are worried about what it's going to mean for them in the next few years. Question?
Iti?
Kia ora, I'm just interested in the intersection with Three Waters when we're talking about potable water, and that was identified as a priority, because I know at some Valkyrie people brought up, well, where does Three Waters tie into this? A lot of the community don't see the separation of it. So that's my, was there any feedback around Three Waters? Were people talking about that?
Lots of people don't know who does what, and I was probably one of them a few years ago, so can't blame them. And it's also people rurally who are taking water from rivers, not for town supply, just for a household supply. And also some of the councils were commenting because they do take their town supplies from our rivers, so this plan could affect their takes as well. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in what their because when Three Waters came about, it was about ensuring that we had good quality potable water.
Yeah.
Then there was a campaign, I guess, that was very anti-Three Waters, and it's a theft of assets. And I guess I was just quite interested in where the community was landing with, clearly they were getting mixed up, which was my experience as well, as to what is Three Waters, what is fresh water. But I guess what was the feel towards Three Waters from the community? Because we're talking about potable water. Did they have a better understanding of?
We tried not to get people talking about that too much. We sort of said, that's not us. We're here to talk about fresh water. But people were commenting about it where they were taking water from the rivers for drinking supplies. But that was more of a small scale than the big ones in most of the feedback. Right? Yeah. The last point, people want practicality. They're happy to work towards fresh water as long as they know what they're doing is going to work. If they're investing in making changes, they want to see results. We did get a lot of feedback about people dumping rubbish in rivers, which was not directly on the plan, but something that everyone was very concerned about. Again, like Steph said earlier, everyone wants clean water. It comes down to the details of how we're going to get there and who's going to pay for it. And people did say they'd like an opportunity to comment on later drafts as we get more detail, because this is a high-level summary, but when it got down to specific rules like degrees of slope and how many meters back from a waterway you should fence, that's when it started to get contentious, when we got right down to those details. What's achievable with climate change? So some of this natural effects, we can do as much as we want to reduce sediment, but if climate's going to blow it all away anyway, how much do we want to invest trying? We've got to be realistic in what we can achieve. We can't not do anything, but where do we draw that line? Forestry was a big topic, obviously, because of what's happened in Gisborne, especially up the East Coast. People said, we don't want to be next. We don't want to end up like that. So there was lots of interest in this climate adaptation. How are we going to deal with it when the weather hits us? Can the stuff we're doing to help the rivers also help us survive whatever might happen in the next few years with the weather? And just fairness, flexibility. A lot of farmers said they want to do things, but they want to do it their way. They don't want to be told exactly what they need to be doing. They know they need to manage slopes. They want to do it the way they want to do it. So that's where they said, can we use the farm plans rather than regulations to bring that flexibility into it? Lots of people were worried the rules would put them right out of business, because at this stage, they don't know in detail what those implications are going to mean. We did some economic analysis at a regional level, but there were some localities where certain rules would have bigger impacts than others. So we're now working on that at some farm scale case studies of what different rules could mean for individuals. Lots of people wanted to know if there'd be compensation or incentives. That'll probably come down to budget, but there was lots of interest around that point. As I said, support for doing the right thing, but wanting to do it their way. Lots of concerns about pest plants and flood protection if we manage things differently. If we're retiring areas, who's going to look after those and have them not end up full of weeds and possums? If we plant around a waterway, is it going to end up flooding upstream? So, bringing that practical aspect and ongoing cost into the picture. Timing, some people wanted to see changes straight away. They said our water's bad enough, we don't have time to waste, get it back to the A grade straight away. But then the people who were affected by the rules said they're going to need time to adjust and implement these things and see what's happened with the things I've already done in the last 10 years. So there was quite a lot of contrast in the timeframes we were given there. And a lot of the farmers who came to these events were the proactive types who had already done a lot of good things. And they said, we're already doing good things. We don't need more rules, but that guy down the road, he could clean up. So where to draw the line so the rules pick up the people they need to pick up without punishing earlier adopters. Do you want to do this bit?
When it comes to water quantity, when we ask community about how to set the minimum flow and how to allocate, and the feedback we got is that the general feeling for habitat protection is supported, and people wanted more reliable rather than have more quantity. And to that reliability, there's also feedback on how to provide that certainty, including support for water groups and also storage. Around water storage, community asked questions about the efficiency of that and also the cost of it. In areas there's indicated as overlocation, we also received a lot of ideas about questions about how to improve that situation. Questions around accounting data, do we have the information right? And also concerns about the water taking outside to support outside the catchment. There's also asked about priority to be focused on frost protection, animal drinking water, and also strong support for efficiency. Also acknowledging that some of the groundwater information, it's come later, that wrapped into a later engagement information, but that's something that we didn't have in the beginning of the engagement. When it comes to freshwater management unit specific issues, that's where we got input in terms of like specific locality and specific issues. It include there are big catchment, big FNUs that in our data consider the water quality is generally okay, and community point out about this particular rivers or streams or modify into canals, and that caused quite a bit of concern for the local community, and was a privilege for us to listen to those stories community shared with us as well. Other specific one, like Jess mentioned about those high impact area, including those catchment, including sensitive receiving environment, that's with lakes and with estuaries, where they will ask more questions about what cost analysis relate to this particular environment. In lowland FMU, we got feedback, questions about drainage and flood protection, as we have seen a lot of water that came through in the recent period. For the Rangitaiki, the hydroelectricity generation is an issue in terms of constrained water use. Gravel extraction is a topic that raised in the East Coast management areas and also Wailika areas. In the Tarawera, questions about reduced industry discharge and wastewater discharge. And with those feedback, planners are taking a close look to the specifics, and also in the future workshops coming up.
Thank you for bearing with us. We recognise that it's a huge amount of information that the team have attempted to summarise. And the next steps from here, the wider planning team will be working on drafting those plan changes and Section 32s to support it. There are further workshops that are planned in November to look at the draft plan changes and the assessments. And ultimately, the team are working towards having those draft documents to come to council on the 13th of December. And we'll provide a supporting document with an outline of the engagement activities, with the hope that that gets approved by council for circulation in the new year at that 14th of December meeting. I'd just like to thank you for your questions, your attention, for considering the paper that we've brought to you. It has been a big amount of work, and we've really appreciated the support from the council, but also the support from the community who've given their time, whether it's in person or online, to share their views on freshwater and help us come to grips with what is a really tricky question for us and for the community. Would welcome any further questions.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Nees.
Thank you. You noted that you had specific feedback on clawback of allocation. So was there a general willingness for people to relinquish some of their consented allocation if they weren't using it, or if a water body or the FMU was over allocated?
For the feedback received, it's not necessarily with specific consent holders. Overall, community is support of efficiency when there's water shared more effectively and efficiently. Hence, there's some feedback and support for community water groups where the water considered may be shared more efficiently among the group.
The question is around the term of consents. Did you get specific feedback about what people think a fair term is for a water take consent?
Didn't have anything specifically about the terms, but on your earlier question, people who are currently using water did want to keep using that water, but they agreed in the broad sense of reductions at a larger scale, as long as it didn't affect them too much. And there was some talk about efficiency. There's lots of consents that aren't fully utilised, so whether some of that water that's allocated but not used could be reduced. And things like if people aren't using water at the same time, they could coordinate and combine their consents, and ways of reducing that didn't actually impact them as much as cutting it off. So they were open to working on things, but most people did want to be able to continue their operations.
So just before we close this off, so Namuta, really just some comments from you, please. Clearly, we are yet to see the shape of the new government, but if we look at the manifestos of the parties that may be in a position to form a government, certainly they are looking potentially at some change in terms of the freshwater space. So wise one, What do you suggest our strategy should be, given that we have got some uncertainty? Do you have any comments you could make in relation to that? Thanks.
So through the chair, clearly there is some uncertainty. We are waiting for the new government to form and for their any new direction to be given. We do anticipate that there will likely be early next year when we'll get some further understanding of where this new government is going. For us, in relation to freshwater, we are in a really good position. At the end of this year, you will have a full draft of the plan change. So we still have a full year before we hit that notification date. So we do have time to be able to pivot as and when needed. But certainly we will continue to serve the government of the day, and we are particularly focused on continued delivery of what we must do.
Thanks, Ngā Councillor Eti.
Just to that question, Madam Chair, will there be any analysis as to the costs if there are any major reforms? Because we spent a lot of money in this entire process. And if a new government comes in and says, hey, these are the new rules, go out and do it again, will we be doing any analysis around the cost of those policy shifts and be giving feedback to whichever minister has pushed out the new reforms?
You took my question and put it much better than I would have put it, but I would hope, and it's something we can talk about in our workshop, that Local Government New Zealand and the regional unitary sector will have some analysis in terms of the pivot and the costs thereof and so forth. So I would hope that our representative bodies would have a keen eye in terms of what that may or may not mean. Councillor von Dadelsen.
Madam Chair, at the start of this presentation, you talked about, Steph, 70 staff have been working on this. Is that across planning as well as communication? And because we're going into long-term plans, how much money have we spent on this already? Do you know that? And I say senior management definitely should. So just so that we get a feel for where we are to answer your question. Thank you.
I can answer in regard to the staff who are working on this, and I'll ask Ngā Mitu if she wants to add any comments around cost. In terms of the 70 staff, that's not staff full-time, but that's staff from our science team, from our planning team, our engagement team, our communications, Te Amorangi, GIS, land management, EDS, and consents, thank you, compliance, and I apologise for any that I may have forgotten. Not all of those staff attended public events, absolutely not, but we definitely had friends that we phoned when we were going to particular freshwater management units where we were aware that potentially compliance might be an issue. And we wanted to know that we had a compliance staff member who was briefed on that area available to answer questions. So it's about developing those plan change processes and the many parts of the puzzle that are working towards that.
Magnificent example of metrics management.
Yeah, I'm not questioning your process, so don't get me wrong.
So costs.
So in terms of costs, we have got our long-term plan coming up, and one of the activities we'll be bringing back to you is freshwater. So we'll be able to, in that conversation, be able to explain the costs that you've got for your freshwater activity. So we'll come back to you on that. Yeah.
That's looking forward. What the question that Councillor Eti asked was, what's the cost to date?
So on average, Julie, do you have a cost off the top of your head? I think we'd have to come back to you on that, Councillor von Dadelsen. We certainly are able to give you the costs, I guess, for the freshwater policy component of it per year. That's not a problem, but we also have contributions from the broader organisation into the development as well. So I'll come back in terms of the policy and planning annual costs.
So I've got Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Ngā Mitu, and you're right. We are operating in uncertain times, and a new government may well, and as their right is to change things. But I also remind people that unless it's prohibited, we still have the power of general competence within our legislation. And this council can still overlay whatever it likes in our policies. despite the government of the day. So an example would be the last ACT National Coalition government in 2012 created a whole series of legislation, which some was very good, I might add, but took out the full well-beings of the purpose of local government, which was ignored because they couldn't enforce it, because we still had the power of general competence to do what our communities wanted us to do through due process, and we should never forget that. So, for example, if the government of the day proposes to take Te Mana Atawai out of fresh water, which is their right to do, does mean to say that we cannot, unless it's prohibited, which would be a very brave government or stupid government to do that, unless it's prohibited, we can still have that overlay if we choose to as a tool. So don't forget that.
Probably a similar sort of point really is, we've learned some things from the community, which I think will be hold true in any case. One of the things I picked up is about some of the things about making sure that we are not too broad in our policy making, so that it doesn't make sense at a local level. So localism is a theme that's in the air. So it may well be that farm plans is a better level of direction to go. There's some questions around, it's outside our responsibilities, but dumping and littering and stuff like that. So there's some relationship stuff to work with other authorities. In any case, whatever the new environment will look like, that's going to be that is a thing that we should address somehow in some shape or form. So there's some things, lots of things we've learned from this there, and we can make use of the sunk cost that we have. So let's be positive. I feel very positive about the feedback we've had. It's been some really good information from my point of view. So well done.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that sentiment. I think the report and all of the work, all of the mahi that's gone into this has been absolutely excellent. Congratulations, Steph, to you and the team. I think, really, really good stuff. So we're on track. Let's keep going. So without further ado, I'll move the two recommendations contained within the report. Seconded, Councillor Scott. Further discussion, debate, there being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, aye, against and carried. Peter, were you Western Bay?
I've been around.
Haven't got my glasses on, but I thought I recognised you. Welcome to the team. Okay, so thank you very much indeed. We're now moving on to the operating environment. Julie. Welcome, Julie. We are in your hands.
Morena councillors, I'm not sure whether we really need to discuss the first item in this, which is the resource management system reform update. Just outlines a few main things, but we've got to see whether that actually happens as noted. There's likely to be change, etc. So we will come back with the implications in later meetings, etc. So that covers the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, and even the Regional Planning Committee process. So just a few bits of information there. But Section 2.14, changes to the RMA Act, they have effect now, and they are things that staff are working on. The bulk of them sit with the consents team, and they are working through what they would need to do. So that's outlined in that section. Before I move on, were there any questions about those RMA changes that they did come into effect in the 24th of August?
Any questions, comments, councillors? There are none, Julie.
Thank you. And I just wanted it made clear there that in terms of the maximum duration of the next freshwater related consents, that there are a number of the very large consents that are excluded from that actual requirement, etc. So those are things that we're thinking about going forward because those rules apply now, those changes. So the draft transitional National Planning Framework proposal, which is about pulling all of the MPSs and the NESs together to then help inform the new Natural Built Environment Act, etc., and even helping to inform the development of a regional spatial strategy. We've been asked for feedback, but because there are changes going forward, at this stage, we've only got a little bit of feedback because a lot of the new the proposed change, putting together the National Planning Framework, a lot of the NESs, MPSs and NESs that we've got, there's not actually a lot of change between them. They're just all put into one document. There are just a couple of points that we could possibly raise in that, and if we do think that we should still do that and it does carry on, we will report it to the 13th of December meeting if we do actually need to make any changes there. But any other questions in terms of the National Planning Framework, which is actually still just in its first draft? It would actually go out to full consultation if it does continue next year.
Denise?
Thank you. One of the issues that we've grappled with is the conflicts between the national policy statements and the need for some sort of way of rationalising the conflicts. I'm not clear to what extent the National Planning Framework has resolved those conflicts. And if it hasn't, as Councillor Thompson seems to indicate, should we be submitting on that point alone? Because, the MPSUD and the MPS highly productive land, the MP and NHD, they all overlap and cross over, and it's just going to be a nightmare making decisions as to which one you favour and which ones you ignore. So is that a submission that we would or should be making?
So through the chair, that's absolutely an opportunity. We were still as staff discussing as to whether to recommend to you that we do a submission or not. The regional sector is doing a submission. We will double check to see if that is still the case. We thought that given the importance of that issue that you raise in terms of having clarity around how the different pieces of national direction link, we thought there could be a strong voice coming from the regional sector as a whole. So certainly if that's the desire of this council to lodge a submission, we certainly can, if you want. Yeah.
I do.
Yep. Okay, we're hearing support.
Yes, that's totally one of the main points that we may want to raise, is just making sure that they do work without conflicting between each other. So thank you. Yes, and I don't think it's going to be a big submission, but yes, those would be some of the main points. Thank you. And now in section 2.3, there is a proposed national policy statement in terms of natural hazard decision making, and that's been outlined, and we have provided an attachment with a draft submission there. So if anybody has any questions, and Mark, if you
could I just make the point that our RPS Natural Hazards is exemplar and in fact won a planning prize. And it is really, really pleasing to see that much of what is proposed is going to build on that. So that's I think a real plus for us. So well done. So Councillor Nees.
I didn't see, when I looked at the MPS itself, a definition of tolerable. And I didn't see that in our submission either. And because it's so important, I know we had appeals on our RPS plan change on how you actually quantify what is tolerable and what isn't tolerable. And I just wonder whether that isn't a point that we shouldn't be requesting as resolved in the MPS.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, I certainly agree. We've tried to cover that under point number 6, but we can make that clear. We've used the term low risk because that's what's reflected in our RPS, but they have used tolerance, so similar terminology, but the issue remains it's not clearly defined, and it should be. Yes, I agree.
So do councillors have any comments in relation to the draft submission? I like it. It's short, pithy, to the point, and covers off most of the points that we have already got and covered in our RPS. So if there aren't further comments, we can take that as approved and well done. Thank you.
And we'll just add a sentence into that section 6. Thank you for that. Okay, so moving on now to the National Environmental Standards for commercial forestry. That's really just an update on that. It was previously the NES for plantation forestry, so it's broadened out a bit and explained there. Any questions in terms of that? And the councils that, if they want to put some rules in, are the district and city councils because they're land. But it does tie in a little bit to our work to think about as we go forward. And then the last section is just some info on the Regional Pest Management Plan, where we're going to bring a paper to council in December seeking to endorse to undertake a partial review of it, and it outlines where that is.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Julie, will that include inclusion of the golden clam in the pest management plan? I mean, it has been recognised by nationally, and so sometimes we don't specifically mention those organisms, but it is such a high threat to us. What was the intention that staff will consider adding it as an exclusion pest or something like that?
Through the chair, if I can talk to that, you'll recall a few months back at a previous Strategy and Policy Committee, we asked if you wanted us to bring forward the review to include that. The direction at the time was not to. We're happy to bring that back again for further consideration, given you have much more information now in relation to how that is progressing. So we can certainly do that if that's desired.
Councillor Von Dadelsson.
I think we still should take a lot of care on that one, because it's something that we will struggle to control if it comes out, to stop it coming in. And if it does come in, then our options for eradication are very limited by what I've read. So we've got to be careful what we wish for and how we write any rules around it, because we will be constrained to what we can do if or when it gets here.
So just for a point of clarification, staff will come back to us and say, here's the pros, here's the cons, and then we'll make a further decision. So we're not going to say today she's in.
So through the chair, in the paper that we bring back for your December meeting, we can bring back the material that we provided previously on this for you to make any, to give us any additional direction.
Councillor McMillan.
Oh, just a quick one on the Kauri dieback. So my understanding is that it's turning out, hopefully, that it isn't actually here after all, and the tracks are now being opened back up. So my question is, because we've had to go through that process, are we wanting to change anyway from exclusion to management because we had a near scare, or potentially it could still be an issue? I don't know if it's 100% definitely not here. Or in light of it not actually being here after all, would we keep the exclusion?
I'm sorry, my staff member, in terms of answering these questions, I don't think is available, or are you online? But I've noted down your question, and we'll follow up when we come back with the report. Thanks for the question.
No further questions or discussion on this particular item, so we'll move the recommendations, including that we ask staff to prepare a submission on the draft NPS, trade-offs, etc. I've moved, seconded Councillor Eadie. No further debate, discussion. All those in favour say aye. Against and carried. Thank you very much, Julie. And now, drum roll. Jane, welcome. Draft submission to the Environment Select Committee inquiry into climate adaptation. Thanks for the report, Jane, and look forward to you helping us work our way through this. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Nick is on leave today, so he sends his apologies. I'll just take the paper as read. I don't have a presentation, but just to give you a few points in terms of context. So this is a select committee inquiry into climate adaptation, community-led adaptation and retreat. And this is to feed into the climate adaptation bill, which is the third part of that resource management reforms. So obviously under the current uncertainty, we don't really know quite what's going to happen with that. So we've kept the submission quite high level in view of that. It's been a bit of an odd process because there were some very detailed papers that came out from MFE, which support the select committee inquiry, but we haven't delved into that detail at this point in time. The submission's been done with the staff across council because obviously climate change touches on a range of our activities, and we focused on those 9 key topics of interest that the select committee identified. The submission deadline is tomorrow, so we don't have much time left. So really it was just an opportunity to get feedback from you all on the draft submission, if you're happy to submit as is, or whether there's some specific points of feedback.
Thanks very much, Jane. Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I think it's awesome, really fully support. And it's great that we've got that kind of exemplar model of the flax roots and how that could be scaled up. So that I think that's really cool. And just in terms of the next steps, yes, fully support the, what was it? The sector-wide submissions. I'm trying to remember my notes now. You had a question. Aligning the submission with sector responses, and staff could also share our draft submission with the wider group, which I'm full support of all of that. Basically, yeah, green light from me. Thank you.
Crosby.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just trying to work out how all this fits together. So this select committee inquiry was to feed into the bill, and the bill is a component part of the National Adaptation Plan. Have I got that right?
No, so the bill, it will be part of the 3 parts of the legislation that were proposed under the resource management reforms. Yeah.
Minister Shaw also created a National Adaptation Plan, a framework of which legislation was supposed to support it.
Yeah,
funding and other things.
Yes. So the National Adaptation Plan is essentially their kind of work programme. So part of that is to sort of develop this legislation. So it is a bit messy, but the plan is not legislation in itself, but this will be supporting some of the actions that lie within that plan. Yeah.
Good submission, by the way.
Thank you.
Councillor Shirley, then Councillor Nees.
Yes, can I check, have we checked that this inquiry was included in the carryover motion? Because with the proroguing of each parliament, all activity is actually expunged unless it's specifically included in a carryover motion. And I'm just not sure what the status of this. I'd be surprised if it's not, but it's something that we should check.
So through the chair, it's my understanding that all of those documents that MFE put out to consult are continuing through this caretaker government period. So that includes the NPF, that includes the NPS for natural hazards, which you've seen submissions on, and that includes this one as well.
Sure, I saw it sitting in the queue. Councillor Nees.
Just with regard to the reference to our climate Flex Roots Fund, I think it's great. It's working really well. I'm really proud that we're offering that. But I think we should perhaps add a few more words, because what it could be taken by the select committee that, well, this is working well for Bay of Plenty Regional Council, so let's make everybody do it. And what I don't want is it to be an unfunded mandate, which will add to burden to people that perhaps aren't as able as we are to do projects like this. So just perhaps and gently encourage a government fund, as opposed to making sure that that has to be done always at a local level.
Yeah, we can look to clarify that in that submission.
Any further comments? Councillor White.
Yeah, no, excellent submission. I totally support the community-led and flax-root-led solutions in this, absolutely. Just a question around the select committee submission. Is this a select committee that we get to speak to, or do we just let our submission lie on the table?
I would expect that it's a normal process and we can opt to be heard. Obviously they haven't formed the select committee yet, so but at the moment we're not intending to ask to be heard. But I guess that's up for debate.
Councillor Eaty.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. I'm just, I guess, have a thought around the shift in languaging to community-led retreat rather than managed retreat. And I guess looking at our Tauriki retreat and whether or not the community there would have considered that to be a community-led retreat rather than a managed retreat, and whether or not as a party that was a part of that and probably going to be a part of these things in the future, whether or not we're stitching ourselves up with that kind of languaging, because we're probably going to have to manage people out of it and it's not going to be very community-led, in which case it's probably going to do more reputational damage than.
Yes, through you, Chair, we have made that point in the submission that community-led is quite misleading. It should only be called that if it's genuinely going to be community-led. And I know, having seen submissions from the regional sector and from ACAN, that a similar points being made that that term needs to be used with care and is not a broad brush term to be used.
Further comments? There being none, Jane, excellent submission. Thank you very much indeed. Move the two recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Macmillan, you should move. And somebody will second. Councillor Cramble will second. No further debate or discussion. I'll put that all those in favour, aye, against and carried. And thanks again, Jane. Excellent work in a difficult environment. So I think, Madam Secretary, are we just about done? It's got to think, sorry. No. So that's us, councillors. That's got to be a record. We'll write that into the record books. 10:53, going to call the meeting to an end and invite you all to go and have a cuppa before we welcome Antoine and